we start officially. So welcome once again, everyone. I hope you're having a good day today. There's drinks were happening this week. There's a lot of also. We're going to update you as much as we can. We will have our traditional 7 minutes or so of introduction, and then I will leave you with a great session that Anu has prepared today. She's our main specialist for anything that is related to Mule for migration in the whole of Europe, and it will be a great session. So again, thank you all very much for joining us today. And with that, we're going to hit our very quick recap of the organizers of these meetups. It's Manik and Sandeep in US, in the Amer continent, Royston in anything that is APAC Asia, and myself in Europe. We usually include some Easter eggs there. You can see the one related to Matrix. There's a new release coming. Not going to make much emphasis on that. I really like it. Okay, keep in mind for today, training and certifications, training.mulesoft.com, training queries in help.learn.mulesoft.com. And if you have doubts, you can use whether the community or Stack Overflow that is specially recommended for runtime questions, data with transformations, and so forth. Guidelines, you can pop your questions in the chat as always, and anyone in the community can try to answer. The remaining of the questions will be asked in your behalf at the end of the session. All of our recordings are going to be in the same meetup page, and you can also find it in the VirtualMuleys YouTube channel. I will be sharing all these slides that you see today in the same meetups page, so don't worry. You can leave the feedback to us, anything that you want to see, something that is missing, something that you would like to hear about. You can leave it in the feedback that will be passed after the session. Now, this is the link related to the VirtualMuleys recording. You can take notes if you want. It's a shortener, mule.is mqrdf, and you will be able to open the VirtualMuleys channel. And the second most exciting session, part of the session today, is the announcements and updates. There's so many things going on that we're getting lost in them, and today I'm going to try to help you. So the first one, Metrics Toolkit, previously known as Metrics Framework or Metrics Accelerator. These are two great resources that you can use if you still don't know what it is about. It's very important because it's a way for you to be able to justify the value of MuleSoft, to get that behavior over time, how to showcase it to management, how to showcase it to leadership. This is the metrics toolkit. You can track assets through time and so forth. So here are two main videos that can teach you, one, why would you use it? And second, how do you install it? Another thing that I wanted to touch base with you, community, and I need your help on this one, is the out-of-the-box metrics accelerator. This is something I have heard from some of you and some of my customers, that you would like to, instead of using an open source technology, to have something within the Anypoint platform that you can enable the metrics framework or metrics toolkit without making any effort. And that's an idea that I created. You can see there the link. I will pass them through the session, and you will see them in the slides. You can vote for that idea so that we can let the MuleSoft product know that is important to you. Okay, so one of the most exciting releases that MuleSoft has done in this quarter, increase existing connectivity options. Some of you know what I'm talking about. You had VPN, VPC peering, and Direct Connect. So 2 out of 3 that are presented here are not self-serve. And for some of you, because we're not all network engineers, I'm not, it's very complex to set up. So what MuleSoft came up with, it's from your ideas actually, in the ideas portal, is the AWS Transit Gateway support. It's already there. It was released 13 September, and we're going to see some of the main resources you can use to learn and how to start using it. Quick recap here, Transit VPC versus Transit Gateway. You see in the left and right. So this is an extension capability. Is not a deprecation of the other network protocols that you have worked with. Doesn't mean that you have to change everything. It means that there's another option that you can use. You can see the comparison between the two of them. We're not going to dive too much into it. You can check the slides or the public documentation afterwards. Main points: AWS managed HA scalability, normalizing EC2 or VPN overlay, higher throughput, burst to even 50 gigabits per second per availability zone. These are the main resources, all documentation, public documentation. You should be able to find it as well in Google. But I have something more interesting for you. There's a new initiative from our solution engineering team where they are creating a portal with how-to tutorials. It's called mulesoft-labs.dev. And there is already one related to transit gateways that you can use if you're interested in learning more about the technology. This is also mapped to the main reference in the documentation, so you're never lost. With that said, again, we're going to share the slides. You can ask in the chat if you're really looking into one of these features, and I will come back with an answer. And now we're going to talk very quickly about the Dreamforce 2021. Where is MuleSoft? It's a little bit hard to see there, but let's just recap 3 main points from this Dreamforce related to MuleSoft. Slack acquisition. You want to understand how does that fit with MuleSoft? What are you getting out of it? You want to understand what is the MuleSoft Composer getting so much traction? What it is about? Is it the same that the MuleSoft Composer for Salesforce? And the third one is service trace. So acquisition of RPA. For what? If you're interested in any of these 3 topics, they're going to be talked through during the Dreamforce sessions that you see there in the screen. And you're able to see them whether live or whether on demand later on the day. Again, you will have this slide and you will be able to check which of the sessions for Dreamforce are going to be most interesting for you if you're working with MuleSoft. Now, with that said, and without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to start looking at the chat. And now, Anu, I will leave our audience with you. Thank you once again for making this effort to work with the community, to share your experience.
No problem. Happy to help. Just 1 second. I'm having a few technical difficulties.
Happens at the worst possible time, always.
Okay, I think I got it. How's that?
Yeah, we can see your screen. Yeah, I think it's not on full size though, the presentation. I think if you click the presentation, let's see if it has it doesn't have the option, right? And the bottom.
No, sorry, you'll just have to see
It's
the
all right.
orange, but it's all right. So, hi everyone. Nice to see you once again at MuleSoft Meetup. I would like to cover today Mule4 migration planning. It's a little late in the game, but it's not too late. So what we want to cover today are the benefits of Mule4. Why should I undertake this task? What are the implications of not migrating, including product end of life? Where do I start? Some migration planning and decision guides to help you along, and a short discussion on Mule Migration Assistant, as well as some enablement. And then we can go through some questions that Angel will help me proctor, hopefully. So what are the benefits of Mule4? As you know, Mule3 has been the most stable version of MuleSoft for a decade. Interesting fact, Instagram is also over 10 years old. But when we start thinking about a major version upgrade, we worked with customers to understand what they seek most in our platform. We concluded that there are broadly 3 recurring themes along which our customers look to us for next-gen middleware ESB. And those 3 themes were simplicity, speed, and power. Simplicity of enablement and execution was one of the major themes. We made integration simple and intuitive through the reduction of processes and steps. These all culminate into a faster developer onboarding, increasing productivity for the business and better serving customers internal and external. Speed. Improvements like error handling and continuous access to data expedite the integration and API development process. A lot of features have been added and they are now out of the box. These features greatly reduce development time and provide faster time to market and to production. Again, gaining efficiencies and improving development, freeing up time to work on other projects or new innovations and ideas. And power. Mule 4 runtime engine is more powerful than ever. It has more compute capacity. It takes a resource-based view of the system and non-blocking runtime to minimize resource contention. The new engine in Mule allows users to take advantage of non-blocking I/O calls, and the runtime is a task-oriented execution model, making it a non-block reactive runtime. Let's look at some more key benefits. Mule 3 was a powerful lightweight engine, but Mule 4 transcends that to the next level. Mule 4 is built using the reactive programming methodology that leverages the concept of non-blocking as default thread management behavior. This gives much better performance generally, just by the nature of how they operate. We have measured this performance improvement to benchmark the runtime against Mule 3. Although there can be an infinite number of parameters, we have observed that over most use cases, we've achieved significant performance improvements. Better performance of applications equates to better and improved experience for stakeholders across the business, including end customers. New innovations. There are several brand new features, and we'll have also made improvements on a host of already existing features that will boost developer productivity and improve operational efficiency. And future-proof. One of the highlights. Mule 4 is the latest runtime by MuleSoft, and it is here to stay. We have brought in a lot of flexibility in terms of application upgrades and runtime changes, and we will continue to enrich it with new and improved features. But the idea here is to avoid any further major runtime upgrades. So Mule 3 to 4 should be the last. We are getting ambitious about not having to undergo any big bang migrations any further down the road. As I mentioned, we have a load of new features and improvements in Mule 4. The new runtime version automates and simplifies common complex integration tasks and expands the scope of reusable assets to increase development speed. And boosting developer productivity with a single highly performant expression language for data manipulation, DataWeave 2. Expansion of exception handling capabilities with new error handling and try-scope for best practice development, and improving operational efficiency with easier upgrades of the application and its components, with the introduction of class loader isolation, and a new execution engine for optimal application performance. Mule continues to offer the following with better power: real-time global availability, access data from anywhere, and build responsiveness and drive elasticity and resiliency. How does it do that? Mule 4 manages streaming automatically. Users no longer need to add logic into applications to access data streams repeatedly, and Mule will automatically handle content caching, larger than memory payloads, and closing the streams for the user. Why does this matter? Users can stream and access data concurrently in order to process and transform information at scale. And with the new class loader isolation between your Mule application, the runtime, and endpoint connectors, any library changes that occur internally do not affect the application itself. Connectors are distributed outside of the runtime as well, making it possible to get connector enhancements and fixes without having to upgrade your runtime or vice versa. Why does that matter? So now you can get connector enhancements and fixes without having to upgrade your runtime, and upgrade your runtime version without breaking compatibility with other modules. Mule 4 also introduces DataWeave 2 as the default expression language. Mule 4 introduces one language for data transformation, as opposed to two languages in Mule 3. You can use DataWeave at a much more advanced and powerful level to query and normalize your data. DataWeave simplifies many complex tasks, making it possible to query and transform data anywhere in your flow. Why does this matter? Access data without transformations. Users no longer need to convert data into a set of objects to access it. Instead, they can write expressions to access the data stored in CSV, JSON, XML, or other forms directly. Simplified syntax. Because all operators are now functions, it makes DataWeave easier to learn. And new advanced capabilities. Calling Java functions directly, using multi-line comments, and defining function types and variable types with a type interface. Mule 4 also offers the MUnit test recorder. it automatically generates unit and integration tests based on the application execution itself. This means that users will not have to write more code to validate application behavior manually, which was time-consuming. Instead, they simply have to run their applications to automatically create a test and define it as a black box unit or integration test as desired upon configuration. Enhancements to the API development lifecycle for a far more collaborative building process. Designing APIs for scale with industry-adopted API standards, OAS or RAML on Mule 4. Because Mule 4 is highly performant, you can share, there's a customer-facing benchmark report that will be linked from here that you can share within your organization. With this new capability, users can build APIs with industry-adopted API standards interchangeably between RAML and OAS without rewriting code. Auto-document APIs consistently, generate connectors automatically, implement and validate API specifications, and manage APIs through a single interface. Users also get, sorry, that was my dog, he's making some noise. Users also get a strong typecasting and enhanced error handling for debugging API implementations. You can now synchronize and coordinate API delivery within your entire team. Users can choose to design APIs with web tooling or desktop tooling based on what they're most comfortable with without compromising on the progress of the API itself. Users can work more collaboratively across the entire team, fitting their needs with each tool. They can synchronize changes, whether drafted on the web or on the desktop with Studio, and they can also merge these changes in a Git-like fashion and resolve conflicts via different views before pushing changes to live. In addition, additions have been made to the connectivity ecosystem, so users can connect to modern apps and integrate with legacy systems much faster with any point platform on Mule 4. There is an expanded suite of apps and endpoints to connect to, including SAP S/4HANA, Amazon S3, Salesforce, and many more. A whole list of connectors are available in this deck, which will be available to you after the session. To allow you to securely surface and transfer data in and out of applications, databases, and systems of record, these connectors are available for you. And there are validate connections to systems, and you can use data weave embedded in every connector to confirm data ingestion from the systems nearly immediately. All of this serves to make development faster and more performant. So now that I've listed out the benefits, what are the implications of not migrating? Of course, if you delay your migration, there are some impacts, increasing technical debt. The longer you wait, the more difficult and more expensive this migration will be. You'll have more apps to migrate and your maintenance costs will increase. Also, the ecosystem will weaken. The farther we get into Mule 4, the fewer Mule 3 developers there will be for you to utilize to help you with your migration. And of course, last but not least, and most importantly, you will not be able to leverage the latest runtime and platform benefits. All of the new features we just talked about won't be available to you unless you move to Mule 4. So what are the timelines? Currently, 3.9 is in extended support. I will talk about what that means in a minute. And we are approaching the end of extended support for 3.8, which is in November 16th, almost a little less than 2 months away. So what does end of extended support mean? This means that no support from the MuleSoft infrastructure organization will happen for applications in 3.8. If you're running on Cloud Hub or Runtime Fabric, your applications will be stopped and they cannot be restarted. Support will not help you if you have an issue with your 3.8 application. So this is from November 2021, November 16th. So end of standard support. Right now we're in 3.9 and end of standard support was in March. This means, generally speaking, that you would not be able to deploy new applications in that version. However, an exception has been granted until 16th November for 3.95 and 3.94. So this is to aid you from migrating off of 3.8 at the very least to 3.9 if that is all that you have time for before November. Extended support, what does that mean now that we're in extended support for 3.9? It means that support will help you, but they may suggest that you migrate to a new version because the fix happens in 4, or they will help you but not issue a source code patch. But any sort of security issues that appear, you know, we will help you fix that. And that will last until March 2024. So even if you don't migrate to 3.9 now, or sorry, even if you migrate to 3.9 now, you will still have to plan to move to Mule 4 by 2024. All of these dates are listed in the product support and in the support portal. The link is also in this deck, so you can take a look of all the terms and conditions. So when we go into a bit more detail, each environment has different impacts based on where you are. So for 3.8, as I mentioned, after November, you will not be able to deploy new apps or restart your apps, and all of your apps will be shut down if you are in Cloud Hub. For 3.9, you can restart your apps, but you cannot deploy any new apps. So if you're planning a migration to 3.9, make sure that it is deployed to production before that date, 16th November 2021. Your apps will not be stopped by MuleSoft at that time for 3.9. So runtime fabric, similar behavior for both 3.9 and 3.8. So once again, this will all be on the presentation that is available, so you'll have all that detail. So if we talk about on-premise environments using Runtime Manager to manage, there is a little bit of a different impact. So 3.9, you can restart and deploy new apps, and you can deploy updated versions of your apps after 16th of November, and your apps will keep running. So basically no change, but you know, we still want you to migrate. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention here, which is important. So you can update your apps after 16th November, but they cannot be deleted and redeployed. They have to be the same version, and that goes for Cloud Hub and Runtime Fabric. So for 3.8, if you are on a customer-hosted runtime running and being managed via Runtime Manager, an extension has been granted to November 16th, 2022. So your apps will continue running normally until then. And then after that, maybe I'll come back and talk to you about those impacts at that time, because we're not sure yet. But I do encourage you to still migrate to 4 as soon as possible, or at the very least off of 3.8. Similar, if you have what we call naked Mule standalone deployments, your applications will run normally after the deadline, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't migrate. So the impacts after 2022 are similar. You can keep your Mule runtimes running, but you can't use API Manager or monitoring. But you know, 2022 isn't that far away. It'll come very quickly. So now that I've sufficiently scared you, how do we start this migration? This is an opportunity. It isn't just a chore. This is an opportunity to take advantage of the latest integration trends and adopt some of the Mule 4 features that are brand new. So you can use this as an opportunity to go API-led if you're using it as an ETL, go event-driven if you think that's appropriate. Take a look at the new features in the connectors and in Mule 4 itself, the new design patterns, and see if they fit your development and if you can take advantage of them. Don't jump the gun. Don't rush into it if you can help it. Also use this as an opportunity to realign on a better way to code. There's the uniform error handling framework and the common JSON logging framework. Build and use these, as well as reusable templates and reuse RAML fragments. This will not only speed up your migration, but it will help you have more consistent development practices moving forward into the future. So how do we begin? The first step I encourage you to take is to separate your Mule 3 projects into 3 buckets. Simple applications, no custom components, simple data weave, no connector incompatibility, medium complexity, so maybe some MEL expression language, some limited batch scope, things like that, and high complexity, so multiple flows, big applications, custom code, lots of connectors. Separate those into those 3 buckets. And then using this handy dandy decision guide, start at the beginning. Build your foundation, your custom components, your error handling, your logging, anything common like that, start there. And then go for your proxies, because then you can use that as a quick win to learn your way around Mule 4. And then simultaneously, any new applications that you're building should be built in Mule 4. Do not build them in 3.9. That's not going to help you in the long run. And when you get to migration, the first step is decide if your application has a lifespan of less than 3 years. If it does, then migrate it to 3.9 because it's going to end of life before end of extended support for 3.9 anyway. If not, then if you think that this application is going to last past 3 years, analyze whether there's any immediate business requirements. If there is, use that as an opportunity to rewrite your API in Mule 4, taking advantage of all of the new features and also implementing your new business requirement. If not, then decide if it's business critical. If it is, then use that to start scaling up your migration, and then start with your simple applications and then move to your medium and high. And eventually you'll have to do the ones that aren't business critical either, but you can do that in a priority order. One thing to add, we do have partners and our own MuleSoft professional services to help you with this if you feel that you can't do it alone. So the Mule Migration Assistant, also here to help you. So this is a command line utility. It's an open source application, and it helps you to do a number of things. Evaluate migration complexity, to help you do an initial assessment of how complicated your migration is going to be. Reduce your manual effort by converting things for you that you don't need to rewrite from scratch, such as your project structure, common connectors, things like that. And you can customize it because it is an open source application. What does it translate? So the flows and internal logic, global configurations and elements, your data weave 1 and MEL to data weave 2, munit tests, API gateways, and your connectors if they exist also in Mule 4. So where can I get access to this? This is available on GitHub. The link again is in the deck. We welcome you to also contribute to the project if you think that you can add some, bug fixes or, new functionality to it. Enablement and resources. So when you're doing your enablement and your readiness plan, you should start with training, reviewing the documentation, reviewing MMA to see if it will help you with your APIs, build out your framework assets as a first step, as I mentioned, update your CI/CD pipeline, and educate internally. So in the back of this deck, there are lots and lots of links. I encourage you to take a look at them. First training course I can recommend is Platform Development Mule 4 for Mule 3 users. This is available in a proctored course with an instructor or self-service, which is free on demand. I also recommend highly Application Networks and Integration Solution Design. These are a bit higher level architects, but they go in deep dive into the features in Mule 4 and how best to use them and in what scenarios. Definitely a useful course for developing your applications in the right way, not just, understanding how to develop, but the right way to do it. Also, tons and tons of links and documentation in the back here. Videos, if you're into videos, there's some back here, more technical than this strategy session. And some more documentation, blogs, lots of blogs. The blogs are really good because they talk about why you want to do certain things and not just how, and give you a bit deeper dive into certain features. 2 pages of blogs. And that is all for slides. Let me start with the questions.
Brianna, I will tell you the questions. First of all, thank you very much for the presentation. Just as I see a couple of things about it, all the links will be shared in the slide deck. The slide deck will be posted right after this session. The slide deck with all the links that Anu has mentioned so far. Given that, there's one question, Anu, from Ashok related to what if the client is still using or developing the APIs and applications using Mule 3.9, but they are reluctant not to migrate to Mule 4. What is the impact and mitigation step they need to follow here, as they have a budget constraint?
Okay, so if you are in Cloud Hub or Runtime Fabric, you need to understand the limitations around, let me go back to that slide actually, what will happen to your app in November. So if we go to here, Cloud Hub, you can't deploy any new apps in 3.9 after November 16th. You can update your apps, but you cannot delete them. You cannot, or if you delete them, you cannot redeploy them. You cannot deploy anything new. So if that's the same for Runtime Fabric as well. Oh, actually, you can deploy new apps in Runtime Fabric, but Cloud Hub, no. So that is one impact. If they're on premise, they have a little more time. But as I mentioned in the decision guide, you don't have to do it big bang, right? You can do it in steps over time. Start with common custom components with new apps, go for 4 there. Eventually they will have to migrate, even if they're reticent right now. I mean, end of extended support is in 2024. That sounds far away, but it's not. So if you want, I can talk to them about why they're reluctant, but there's also options with partners to help. I think some of them might have discounted migration packages and things like that.
Great point, actually, and it's related also, we can see in the decision tree that is with the priority of the APIs, and basically also pushing the leadership to understand that after the dates that you mentioned, there will be no possibility to deploy in 3.9. So that's additional reason.
Exactly.
And there's also the, has Anu mentioned already, there is the customer success manager team. So if you're seeing that the business is reluctant, you can reach out to your customer success team to see what can be done. How can we work together?
Yeah.
What do you think, Anu? Is that a good approach?
Yeah, so if you contact your CSM, and then I can get involved and have a one-on-one session with whoever, and do a little bit of education around why we want to move to Mule 4 and these benefits.
That's an important one, because as developers, sometimes we don't know that we have that team available, the customer success team. Okay, thank you for that, Anu. There's another question that is related to the MMA specifically, that says MMA helps to migrate all the connectors, templates, API, applications, and so forth. Otherwise, we need to still write the data weave language, the DWL files, manually for the complex integration scenarios. Can you advise what can we do about it?
So it doesn't translate everything for you. It's meant to be a helper, an assistant, if you will. It will do what it can, but oftentimes there will be some manual migration left, but it gets you farther than if you were to start from scratch. So the connectors, if there's no connector that matches in Mule 4, obviously you can't translate, for example. If the data weave is too complex, then maybe it needs to be rewritten in data weave 2 using the new features. I want to warn against lifting and shifting, because again, you'd be missing out on a lot of the Mule 4 features if you do that. So.
Oh, I know you already covered 2 questions that were coming your way. That's good. The next one is from Abdul. It's about the custom connector specifically. I think you already mentioned, but what about the custom connector support? Will the Mule Migration Assistant also help us with that?
So it will tell you that it cannot migrate it if it can't migrate it. So there will be an error. There will be a report that will tell you what it has migrated, what it hasn't, and then from there you can understand what next steps you need to take.
Okay.
And it's worth looking at the link in this deck that shows you all of the available connectors from Mule 4, because there are a lot. And it's often you can convert what you maybe were connecting via HTTP or something like that and moving it to a connector instead, which is, better.
Oh, we have a new question. Do you recommend if a new client starts building upon MuleSoft, they shall definitely start with MuleSoft 4?
Absolutely. Mule 4.3 is where you need to start, for sure.
4.3, right? Performance related, isn't it?
Yes, it is our fastest.
Okay, if there are no other questions, we will wait 30 seconds. I actually did have one that was related to the Mule 3 customers, because sometimes people believe that everyone is already on Mule 4. When you're working with the migration, are there still a lot of customers on Mule 3?
Yeah, so I think, context, I joined about 2 years ago, and Mule 4 had already been released for quite a long time. But I think when I took the role of migration lead, I didn't realize how many people were still on Mule 3. But it is quite a lot, but I think there are a lot of great benefits to Mule 4. So it does seem daunting. I recognize that, but it's worth it.
Okay. Well, if there are no other questions, I think we can finish the. Thank you, Anu, again for making this time for the community and also sharing all the experience that you have around the migration with all our customers.
Glad to help. And as Angel mentioned, if you have any specific issues around migration, do reach out to your CSM and they can loop me in. Well, it will be me if it's in EMEA. It might be someone else if it's in a different region. But in any case, it's an option.
Nice. It's not a self-help, right? It's
I love talking about migration, so let's do it.
There you go. Okay, Anu, thank you very much. So if you can stop sharing the screen, we will start. Thank you for the session. We will start with the next session that I'm actually presenting. So let's open up the camera. Oh, great. Okay, everyone. So for this session, we're going to talk about the common integration challenges. We're going to focus the point of view. If anyone has read the Project Phoenix, we're going to try to dive into the shoes of when we're working and problems are arising. It's not that you can always use best practices. It's not that you can always do what it should be best at any given time. So we're going to try to onboard what happens when these challenges raise and what you can do about it. This was a quick introduction of myself. For those of you that don't know, I have been the customer success architect at MuleSoft for more than 3 years. And I was actually born in Venezuela, long way far from UK. Now I'm based on London, and I have around 3+ years of IT experience. I'm not going to bore you with the details, but I started with Mule with the version 3.7.3, which is the API gateways, and when MMC was still popular. So what we're not going to see in the session that you already heard about it, it's the latest is the greatest always, is it? So here are 5 points that we hear about best practices that we cannot take for granted. Yes, the latest version, as Anu mentioned, it's very important that we migrate and plan to migrate. For example, 4.3 is a great version, but you cannot skip any of your regression tests. And remember, the effort that Mule is putting into making all these versions converging into one single version is to be able to work with any customer at any given time. Before there was, imagine, more than 100 versions of Mule 3. So 100 different versions that the MuleSoft support team have to provide patches to. And that has to work with individually, depending on the customer and the different packages that they have installed. The idea of converging into 1 or 2 versions is that you will be able to get the service independently of your customizations. That's part of the Mule 4 engine as well. If you have studied about it, about the engine and React based, you will know what I'm talking about. The next point is around training. I think training is something that is taken very much for granted. I was a developer. 5 days of working, of studying with the training team will have saved me around 3 months of learning myself, 6 months, maybe 12 months. So it's very important that we keep it as a priority. The next point is around automation. Everything should be fully automated, including test and at least 80% of test code coverage for every project. We're going to see that's not always the case. Sometimes we're thrown into a project that has 0 tests. And what are you going to do? Are you going to spend the next 6 months writing the tests? What are you going to prioritize? Is it core business APIs, maybe, that you can target? Or maybe it's new development. Every new development will have a unit test. This is the kind of mindset that we need to take sometimes when the resources are limited. Now, point number 4, MuleSoft recommended support process. Some of you, this is boring, it's redundant, but this one is extremely important for anyone that is going to open a support case, that anyone that is trying to troubleshoot MuleSoft applications. The MuleSoft recommended support process is a very easy flowchart that you can see. And in that same page, you will get all the troubleshooting ideas that you need when you're facing, whether it's a deadlock, whether it's other performance issues, whether it's anything related with Cloud Hub, with maintenance, and so forth. And point number 5, which we are not going to talk about today, is the advanced troubleshooting of application performance. This is a great deep dive session made by Vitali in the APAC team. He's a support engineer right now in MuleSoft. He has more than 10 years of Java and performance experience specifically. And he made 90 minutes on how to work with the memory distribution, with the execution engine, and with the dumps on Mule 4. So if you haven't seen it and you work with support cases or you work with performance improvement, that's a great session to see. Now, some integration challenges. We're going to dive into the shoes of what a consultant is doing and what are the challenges coming from the customers or from the situation itself. This will take around 15, 20 minutes more. So please bear with me as we review them. The first one, imagine that is a customer based in Spain. This company has more than 4,000 employees. They are managing more than 2,000 restaurants and grocery stores as well. And you can say that it's a medium-sized company. So what is the situation that you're going to help me diagnose? It's a normal day. You're close to lunchtime. You're preparing on a couple of tasks that you need to finish soon. But suddenly, you get notified on Slack that there's a production outage threat around a specific customer, and you have to drop everything you're doing and go there, prepare as soon as possible to help them. You have 3 hours before the next meeting, and it's not clear what is happening in the customer. So you go there, you read through their support case. There's a lot of there's not a lot of information that you can use. The case doesn't have anything attached to it either. There are some clues about some problems with API layer and the SAP backend. But from the support case, it seems on how was redacted that is a fairly new MuleSoft customer, and they didn't read the resource that we mentioned previously, the MuleSoft recommended support process. So the issue has been going already for more than 2 weeks, and it hasn't been solved. The question here is, it's being said that it's critical, but it has more than 2 weeks happened. When is it happening? Is it happening all the time? What is it affecting? These are questions that we need to think about as we're dragging to those conversations. So you read the email chain, and there's a lot of, if we talk about architecture, talk with person A. If we're talking about analyzing the code, talk with our partner number 1. If you want to analyze SAP BIP, call with this other person, talk with this person B. If you want to review the impact of SAP, talk with person C. So we can see 2 main red flags. The first one, is it really critical, the issue? The second one, the division. There's too much division within the customer. We are not there, in theory, to consolidate one by one to talk with these different persons. There needs to be a capacity within the customer. So what can we do? You offer to schedule a meeting in the 3 hours as soon as you can. You create a very basic diagram. You can see there, what is the minimum information we have? There's an issue happening, there's API layer, and there's SAP. So you build these 3 layers, and you put the backend there. Where is the issue happening is your question. It's not clear for anything in the ticket, and you don't have the thread dumps either. So long story short, you send the recommended process once again, and in there's the point 12, point 19, and point 21 that are related to problems in Cloud Hub, problems with SAP, and problems with connector. So this is an example of when this recommended support process will help you. There's also the reference guide. I will show you the one for Mule 4, actually. That is very helpful when you're thinking about how to work around performance issues. So today not going to make much emphasis into it, but you have here a full list of questions I created when I was working with the customer. You can review them later on. So things like structure of your mindset, information about the issue, information about what work has been done already. Have they thought about the logs? Have they talked about the dumps? Since when is this happening? What is the backend doing? So you create this kind of troubleshooting guide, and you expand on it because you were going to have this meeting probably in 1 hour remaining, so that you can make a efficient troubleshooting session. What happens is the call doesn't happen. There were 2 people on PTO, and they canceled the meeting that they themselves scheduled. It is postponed for 1 week. So was it really urgent? It is reviewed that it's an issue happening only on Mondays, and it's intermittent. Now you entered what is called the email chain hell. There's a lot of people replying to your email, and that's going to be an issue. You want to get into a session instead of going through email, and what happens is you get dragged into another war room. There's more than 15 people, and the conversation is going everywhere. There's not a clear definition of the roles. There's not a clear origin of where the issues is starting, what we're going to do next. So long story short, because there were a couple of sessions happening after that, there was an issue happening on this time. It was happening with the system API. The SAP backend system is where they're taking too long to process the request. And there were 2 main points that we spotted from those conversations. The actual SAP system was having issues. So there was likely the cause of the delays was that same backend. You can see it there in point 3, point B. There was also the suspect being front-end applications or the MuleSoft APIs, but there was no conclusive proof around it, mentioning that there was not proper handling of the connections when the SAP system was actually having the delays. So lots of email exchange, meetings, support cases, etc., etc. What did you need to learn about this experience? Retrospective. Diagnose through dumps. Thread dumps and head dumps are there to help you. Performance tuning. Think about threading strategies. This was especially applying for Mule 3. It's not the case anymore with Mule 4. There's less focus on what you need to do here. You need to do some configurations, but it's a lot less. Think about cache. If you're getting HTTP gets and they're repeated, if you're getting millions of HTTP gets, what about implementing cache? Is it possible to get that information stored so that it can be retrieved without actually making the call to your backend? Is your backend able to handle this amount of transactions? Or why are you not creating this cache strategy? Improvements to the backend system. That was actually the biggest bottleneck in this situation. Also, the lack of monitoring knowledge. You have to understand where is the issue happening and what are the times. Where is the time from your backend back to your system API? Who is giving the timeout and where in the layers is happening? And that's the last point that is related to reconfigure the timeouts in the platform. Now, if you're interested in learning more about this specific issue, you can see here the links. It's the MuleSoft recommended support process. There's also 2 links there, very important, around the runtime engine for Mule 4 and the tuning recommendation. Take a look for 1 second. You can see there that there's the repeatable versus non-repeatable streaming, max concurrency, backend service response time, caching, pooling profiles. If any of these ones sounds strange to you and you haven't worked with it in the past, I really recommend that public documentation that will take you on best practices about it. Now, there's another point I wanted to cover very quick, a test plan. I didn't mention it in this case, but you need to think about unit test, at least performance test, and your endurance or stress test as well, your integration test itself as well. This is the ideal scenario where you can have all of this for every single API. We know that that's not always the case. Many customers were all mature at some point, and they opted to create something first. So you go for the unit test and integration test, and then you evolve from it, depending on your priorities on your main APIs. So that was the first case. The rest of the cases are going to be a lot shorter, and I think it's going to take you, there's 2 more that are very important, case 2 and case 3, where you will see something that was a very simple to solve issue, but it was escalated too late. So this one, we're going to go into the US. It's Atlanta, an Atlanta-based company. It's a coffee house company, more than 50,000 employees, and it's more than 30 countries. They were preparing for a big release that was coming. You are, let's say, the tech lead for this important project, and you're dropping to this project to make sure that it works. So the situation, what is happening? Months and months of planning. There has been, this is going to be the most important marketing project in the last 5 years for the company. There's around 700% increase on the request that you're going to get on this period. And your team has done all the performance testing needed and is considered ready. The application is ready. The release is ready. But you can see the red flag once again. 2 weeks before the rollout, one of the senior operations engineers is getting alerts on the test environment about requests that are failing while doing the pre-release routine of stress and endurance test. So after some investigation, you're able to find, the team is able to find that there's a 429 too many requests HTTP response code. The release is happening in 2 weeks. So what is happening? What are you going to do? Where is it happening? Any ideas? Think for a second. What will you do? 429. You have 2 weeks to solve it. And there's an issue with the stress endurance test specifically. So it's not integration. It's something related to loads. Before we go into that, let's do a quick recap of the share load balancer. I'm not going to read the whole slide, but you can see there regularly monitors and scale these limits as necessary. Rate limits on share load balances are applied according to region. If an application exceeds the rate limit of a share load balancer, the load balancer returns a 429. That sounds similar. If we read the next paragraph, there's no way to increase the limit. This is a MuleSoft message, so please pay attention. There is no way to increase the limit that you will have over another customer in the share load balancer. You can try a restart to discard the worker, but if the load is on the share load balancer, that is the issue. It is not on the worker. If you're seeing at 429, then you have exceeded the current rate limit. This was advice coming from a support engineer. So it sounds like the share load balancer, let's read the 2 points below, is not what we're looking for. SLB performance varies in time. There is no guarantee. It's also varies per region and is used for lower rate limits. And you can see in the documentation the limits. So what about another structure? Dedicated load balancer. Handle load balancing among the different cloud workers that run in your application. Okay, but what are the suggestions about the dedicated load balancer? What are we talking about? SLBs and DLBs. The main issue, 429, seems to be related to something in the worker, some throughput in the worker. And the 429 was indicating something related to the load balancer. Now we're thinking about shared load balancer versus dedicated load balancer. For some of you, it's very obvious. For this case, a customer that is ready for production is under a lot of stress. It's the biggest release in 5 years. It was not obvious. And this is very important to highlight because when we are in the field, when we are in the trenches, sometimes we take longer to make these decisions. So consider, these are some words of advice. Consider DLBs whenever you're reaching more than 50, 100 TPS per API. I will say always consider DLB first. And unless you have 1 million of transactions per month, the out-of-the-box 2 workers for the DLB should be enough. This is a guideline. You can always do the performance test to make sure that it adapts to your complexity. Use the DLB for accessing the process system to remain in the VPC instead of going out to the share load balancer public and then going back in. Think about if you have in the VPC both process and system. If the process is calling some, let's say, public domain from the system, it's going to go out doing some sort of network hairpinning, introducing latency to it. So think about that constraint as well. So this, again, the dedicated load balancer is a low-cost resource compared to the benefit it has. Sometimes customers will argue that it's expensive. Not expensive, that is an additional cost. But the cost of the DLB is so low with the comparisons of what you're avoiding, that is issues in production. So please always ask yourself, not when you should be using the DLB, but why are you using the share load balancer instead? Now, I talk a lot, but this is the Catalyst. You can find in Catalyst the Cloud Hub Physical Architecture example. I know it's a little bit hard to see there because of the resolution, but there are a couple of DLBs and a couple of VPCs. There are 4 DLBs that you can see there, and 2 are private, 2 are internal. There's a reason for that. In the guidelines, you can think about 2 DLBs, let's say for testing. One for your public experience APIs, could be a case, and one for your private APIs like process and system. And then you need these 2 DLBs as well for production. You want to segment it out of the testing, your pre-prod and your prod environments. So this is not a rule, it's a recommendation on how you should think when you're approaching this issue related to a network, more than issue the architecture. It's very important. So retrospective, evaluate if using the CLB is a valid use case for you. In many scenarios, you should get the DLBs. And this is not a sales pitch because the cost of the DLB is minimum in comparison. My suggestion, I was a customer and we experienced this issue as well. We had an SLB and we needed a DLB at some point. It's better to have it as soon as possible. Now, there you have the resources, the Cloud Hub physical architecture that I mentioned, and the Cloud Hub networking guide that is public documentation. With that, we close the second case. Remember, you can put your questions in the chat and we will try to answer after the session. We are going to take around 15 minutes more for the rest of these case studies. 3 is the most complex one, and then they will be very short. All of these cases that I'm telling you about are experiences that I had with different customers. The reason why I'm putting this today is because I want to avoid issues for you and for other customers that are maybe not thinking about those specifically, but could be impacted by them. So now we're going to talk about CI/CD. Very shortly, you receive a request. You're sitting in the office. You receive a request that a customer wants to hear about the best practices for transformation rules, error handling, logging, CI/CD, and how to avoid hard-coded values. What happens next? With that minimum information, you join the call to hear a discovery call with the customer to hear what is going on. The customer is extremely frustrated with the MuleSoft Anypoint platform. It's stating, you can see there in the point number 2, you can read it. The solution is useless. There is no way in MuleSoft to do proper CI/CD and that the behavior is unacceptable. That person keeps raising the voice, no insults, no personal offense, but you can clearly see that it's an extremely stressed person. What happens next? You're part of customer success, so you need to hear what is going on. You need to hear the pain of the customer, let them express themselves, and understand what the hell is going on so that you can try to help them. Even if that sounds angry, there's no insults, there's a lot of pressure, and what is happening next is that you try to drive the focus into a solution and not to focus on the frustration. That call suddenly moves from, you can think about the Eyes of Fables when there's this lion that has something in the palm, a thorn in the palm, and the protagonist, which is Baldassare, from the Eyes of Fables, he will actually remove that thorn and alleviate the pain of the lion. So that's exactly what we're trying to do here. We're trying to understand what is going on. And in that call, we managed to get the information we need. The pipeline, CI/CD pipeline for the customer from development, a change in development, a configuration file, is taking 10 hours to publish into production just for a configuration change. Wow, that's crazy. And we're talking about Cloud Hub, right? It's not internal configurations, it's Cloud Hub. So if we mistype an URL, we amend the YAML configuration file, we push it to Git, and the change takes 10 hours to deploy to the Anypoint platform. The YAML configuration change required to rebuild of the code and therefore requires deployment of all our APIs. That in the case was around 20 APIs. That sounds suspicious. I never heard of a customer having an issue of 10 hours. You could have an issue of 15, 30 minutes to deploy a MuleSoft application in Cloud Hub that is known per environment, correct? But what is happening here? You get a second meeting where the customer is more calm. You already suggested a couple of logging frameworks, common login error handler, error handlers and common logging frameworks. The customer knows that you're hearing, and now we're diving into a screen sharing. This that you see in the screen is exactly the screen that we saw. I have blurred any information so that you cannot know which customer is it. There's no information there that is confidential, but this was their pipeline. You can see that there was one pipeline in Azure DevOps. For those that are not familiar, in the center, you can see the stages. So you see test CA. That's test Canada, test US, test United States, test SG, test MI, acceptance CA. So you have all the different environments and you have all the different countries you're deploying to. And it seems that there's one deploying per country, one deployment per country per environment. That's where they got the 20 different applications in their pipeline before they can release to production. Now, the first question that for anyone that is a developer will be raised is, okay, what are you doing sequentially? What is your pipeline doing that sequentially? And that's is the key question here. That was the main issue that the customer was having. There were two main points. They were using the Mule Maven plugin. So they deployed to CA. They were waiting 15 to 30 minutes to deploy there. Then to US, 15 to 30 minutes to deploy there. And each of them. The solution here was quite straightforward. But before we go into that, let's think about the issue that we're seeing. One API per country. From 2 countries, total to more than 15 new countries. So initially, they were thinking of only 2 countries. Months later, they extended to 15 countries when they started to have the issue. In the Azure DevOps pipeline that we saw, it was all sequential deployments. And they were using the Mule Maven plugin, which default behavior is to wait until deployment is completed. So you don't skip the verification. You wait until it's completed. What were quick solutions for this scenario? The first one, the most tactical thing you can do is get the Mule Maven plugin and set the skip verification to true. That way, instead of taking 10 hours for deploying each small change, you will start taking a lot less because you will just jump from one command of deployment to the next without waiting for the verification. Of course, this is a trade-off and it's just a tactical solution. But instead of 10 hours, you probably will take less than half an hour to deploy everything. The next one, strategic approach. Think about parallel branching per country and some kind of property injection. So you don't store the properties in the source code. You can see there the reference to the articles on how you can work with the Mule Maven plugin, actually. And you can also set the values directly into your at runtime time when you're releasing those pipelines. So you create one release pipeline that has the configurations per country, or you could even have some sort of umbrella API that will do all those two starts for you. These are more strategic long-term solutions. The tactical one was to skip the verification. So 2 very important resources here. CI/CD in 10 minutes is an overview in the Friends of Max video. Or even better, this is a session from John Oldspawn and Paul Heyman that is extremely important. Is some people said that it's the origin of DevOps, the real evolution of CI/CD happened after that session. It's the 10 plus deploys a day with DevOps, Dev and Ops cooperation at FLIRC. The resource is there for your awareness. Now, very quickly, let's remind in the DevOps with MuleSoft, or mostly how is the API lifecycle in MuleSoft. You do have the API designers in the left, working with Design Center, API specification. They can publish into Exchange, or they can leave it as a specification. Developers can download that into Studio. Then they will push it into a source code management. And then is when the CI/CD pipeline will come into place. Let's say some technology like Jenkins, you can test, just run those automated tests that you have, unit test, then build with the automation server. It could be the same as Jenkins. And you need to store those builds somewhere in an artifact repository so that you can manage releases. In the future, you don't want to go through the whole process to get that package. You want to be able to go back in time and say, okay, we need to roll back to the previous package that is 3.a version 355. Okay, we can do that. We have the package already there. We don't have to rebuild them from scratch. And then is when you deploy, whether to production, development, QA, wherever you want in the environments. That is when you use the Mule Maven plugin, Anypoint CLI, or Platforms API. Now, that was the issue number 3. Issue number 4, and then we're going to go lightning fast. Should be around 5 to 7 minutes more, and we're done with it. And you have learned 10 very common scenarios of issues that I have seen in the last 6 to 12 months. This one is related to unable to use the CPU. Unable to use the CPU. So what is happening? It is observed that when running a CloudHub application, the CPU utilization does not appear to use all of the CPU capacity. It may be that the CPU is maxing out at 50%. In some scenarios, it may appear that the CPU is locked at 10% or 20%. Has this ever happened to anyone in the call? Some of you may have an idea of what I'm talking about. Imagine that you have your CloudHub application, you're deploying a 0.1 worker, and you start seeing that maybe the CPU is locked at 10 or 20%. So the question here is, what is causing it? And this has been a question for many customers. Sometimes it's not that clear, but let's dive into what is going on. There are 3 main causes, potential causes. The first one, you don't have a node concurrent loading the application, so there's not enough requests going, there's not enough throughput to raise that CPU. Maybe the application is single-threaded, is using synchronous flows, using max concurrency 1, and setting an inbound connector to only 1 thread or 1 consumer, or any combination of those 2. Or maybe, and this is the most common, the 0.1 or 0.2 vCore, where there are CPU burst capabilities, is already exhausted. This is very important when you're working with 0.1 and 0.2 vCores. There is a bursting capability that loads upon time. So what happens here? Let's go to retrospective. Let's go into the text itself. It is recommended that applications require infrequent bursts of high CPU followed by low or idle time may work well on a 0.1 or 0.2 vCore worker. May work well on a 0.1 or 0.2 worker. For applications that require a sustained high CPU more than an hour continuously, a non-fractional vCore worker is recommended. A 1 vCore and above do not have burst capability limitations, and the full CPU capacity is available indefinitely. There's a support article there that you can find, but think about it as this. 0.1 and 0.2 workers, they will start loading what we call CPU credits. Then, when the CPU capacity is exceeded, there's too many throughput going through it, it will be able to grab the CPU credits and work on top of what will be the CPU limit, so that you can deal with this infrequent burst of high CPU. Again, there's a support article there, but it's very important that you realize the difference between fractional and not fractional vCores. This is a very common issue for the support engineers. The next one, it's about network. There's as I said, there's 6 minutes more. The next case studies are going to be so much lighter, and you're going to learn more common issues. So around network, there are organizations that have a dedicated network team. Many don't. And imagine that, at least in my case, more than 5 years ago, I was a backend developer, and I was in charge of setting up the network for my organization in a mid-sized company, my Anypoint platform network connection. And I was not the most qualified person for network work. It was not my specialty area. I was a developer at that time. So what happens later is the configuration may be revisited in a couple of semesters or years because there's an ongoing review or ongoing issue. Or the employees will be dragged again with alarms that are happening about the throughput of the system or anything that is going wrong. So you need to sort whatever is happening there. What are the common pitfalls here? We're running out of static IPs. We're releasing in a week. Why is this happening? What do we need to do now? And the sudden answer is, oh yeah, let's create a S1 support ticket. Don't do that. Try to think before the issue happens. If you're running out of static IPs, why is that? And what are the best practices about static IPs? You can see the reference there in the slide. You will get the slides after this session, so you can check it yourself on your own time. It's a very common issue, so be aware. Why are you running out of static IPs, and what are the best practices of static IPs? It's in that link that you see in the screen. Our VPN is down. There's no traffic there. There is no traffic at all. Do you have VPN redundancy? And if not, why? You don't know. Why you don't know? These are two very key issues that I have seen with customers. Very important that you realize if your VPN is set up for redundancy. Now that we have the AWS Transit Gateway, you may have another way of doing it. You could have direct connect before, and it would be very different setup. But think about VPN, you need redundancy. There's another article there. Now, I will read very quickly the next three. It worked for our 50 TPS transactions per second pilot, but in our recent test, the VPC peering is not properly working for our 1 million TPS. So think about it. You're testing with 50 TPS, and tomorrow you need 1 million TPS. Is the VPC peering the correct way of doing it? You need to think about it. So maybe you need another type of network capacity. Are you thinking about AWS Transit Gateway or anything else? Point number 4, we wanted vanity domains since the beginning, and we're trying to set it up now. It's not working. Yeah, again, think about DLBs. Our testing environment is using a more economical network option than our production environment. But now we want to change it so that our performance tests are as similar as possible in both production and development. This is another common issue. You may have a non-production network setup that is more economical than the production, and that's okay. But if you're doing a pre-production performance test, you need to have it as similar as production as possible. Otherwise, you will run into the same issue than number 3. So these are 3 resources that are extremely helpful for these scenarios. Now, special mentions. This is issue number 6, 7, 8, and 9. What else could go wrong? The Jenkins nominations of 2021. One that someone already asked me in the chat is common service definition. Does your team have already a common service definition? If they don't have it, why? There is a very good Catalyst resource. I'm going to share it. I will attach it actually to this slide before uploading, so you have it as a reference. It's in Catalyst. And the point here is to think about common service definition, logging, auditing, exception handling, caching, security via policies, rate limiting policies, and throttling via policies. Think about these structures. Are they already in your team? Are they not? Is everyone in every different business unit, every different team creating their own all the time? Why don't you have a centralized way? That's when we think about C4E, for example. Number 7, very easy win for you. It takes 5 minutes, single sign-on. When you're onboarding and offboarding a colleague, employee, a partner, a contractor, do you have single sign-on to the Anypoint platform? How are you making sure that people are easily onboarded and easily offboarded? Security, governance, and control is what you want. So the minimum viable product is the out-of-the-box multi-factor authentication for MuleSoft users. So that's the minimum thing that you can do in the Anypoint platform. You can set up multi-factor authentication so that anyone needs, let's say, a work phone with a valid MFA to be able to log into the platform. Ideally, bigger and medium organizations, they already have their own IDP, and they do IDP SSO for the singing into the Anypoint platform. That way, you do onboarding and offboarding of everyone in one go. I'm raising this as an employee. Once I move away from one company, 6 months after, I was able to log into the system and not quickly notify my manager that the credentials were still there, still working. And they saw me in the audit as well after I mentioned it. And the point here is, who has still access to your Anypoint platform? And why are you not using SSO? Why are you not using MFA? Point number 8, configuration and secrets management. This is mostly for bigger organizations when you want to store your secrets, when you want to store your configurations in a secret way, in a confidential way, so that everyone have access. If you're a developer, you don't have access to production. If you are a core developer, maybe you do have access to production. If you're an ops engineer, and so forth and so forth. And the last one, number 9, redundancy for your VPN connection. I mentioned this, I mentioned it twice because I saw it happening for one of my customers. VPN is down, there is no traffic. Well, it's very important that we consider, if we're working with VPN, configure high availability and with your Anypoint VPN. So this is the summary. You will get the slides and the recording. I know we're covered a lot. It has been far longer than I expected. I apologize for that. Lastly, the issue number 10, what integration challenge you overcame in the past 2 months? How did you solve it? If you want to share it in the chat, I'm interested in hearing it. If not, it's okay. You can send it by email in the feedback form and so forth later. With that, we finish the session and we're going to open up for any questions you may have. We still have more than 40 people in the line. So if you don't have questions, first of all, thank you for holding. And yeah, we do have a couple of questions. TLB and SLB difference. This is very important. One is the shared load balancer. The other one is the dedicated load balancer. One comes out of the box with the Anypoint platform. The other one has to be requested as an add-on. It's very important as developers, we know the difference and we know to ask when we need the dedicated load balancer. It's all in the documentation. Thank you, Ashok, for sharing the API 0 documentation. That will help you understand the cloud dedicated load balancer, simplify. And there's another, okay, Ashok is also responding on a couple of things that you need to think about. And I think we don't have any other questions. So thank you all for participating today, for joining us today. I will stop the recording now and I will stay in